Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of Growth Secrets. Today's guest is Andrew Michael. He's the host of Churn FM, which is the podcast for subscription economy pros to learn how the world's fastest growing companies are tackling churn and using retention to fuel their growth. Next to that, as a true retention-led and SaaS leader, Andrew also had various marketing and product roles at Hotjar, one of the most popular tools for growth professionals in the world. I'm very happy to get his insights on growing companies from this point of view. Welcome, Andrew. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Yannick. It's great to be here.
Cool. Yeah, you're in Cyprus. I think it's not one of the common countries when it comes to growth-related topics, which is it's amazing. And what should listeners definitely know about you?
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a commonplace for it. And often, obviously, I think I've had over 280 guests on the show, and every time I tell them Cyprus, it's always like, oh, wow, that's interesting.
Where is it?
Yeah, I don't think many people expect that because obviously, predominantly the show is US-based audience. And most of our guests are based out in Silicon Valley. So the podcast I'm typically recording late in my evenings. But yeah, I'm a founder and operator. So I've been in software businesses for over 20 years now. I built my first startup when I was around 21 years old and sold that to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. It was like you could create your own online store in a matter of minutes before online stores were even really a thing. And ever since then, just been iterating. Actually, I joined Hotjar because I had built a previous startup, raised some venture, and then we ended up selling it to a company called Brandzuka, which was an advertising platform. And David Domin, the CEO of Hotjar at the time, was our advisor. And he sort of said, okay, now why not come join Hotjar and see how things are being done here. And when you're ready, you can get started again. And that was sort of where the inspiration for the podcast came, was because although I'd had a couple of startups, managed to find exits and homes for them, they weren't really life-changing by any meaningful way. And the reason was churn and retention. And ironically, at some point, I was put in charge of a churn and retention team in Hotjar, which in retrospect is a very bad idea, but a lot of good lessons learned. And I wanted to start something again, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet. So I said, let me build an audience. And when I was ready, I could sort of sell to that audience. And I chose churn and retention because one, it had plagued me in the past. Two, I think if you ask any CEO what they'd be willing to pay to solve it, they'd say whatever's in the bank, because then it comes back in compounding interest. And so essentially that's where I got started with the show. And then since then, it's just been an amazing journey and a lot of learning from a lot of great people and being able to then apply that with other startups.
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, you've been doing it for over 5 years and you've done 283 episodes of Churn FM. Yeah, what is the most common reason why customers churn? And especially I think a lot of listeners are probably curious how they can prevent that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's the most common reason for churn, because this varies wildly depending on the business, stage of growth, customer segment, and so forth. But I would say there's a very common pattern I've noticed of the way companies go about trying to reduce churn or retention. And it always typically starts with okay, we have to figure out why people are churning. And they implement a churn exit survey, and they spend all their time trying to figure out and fix the things and the reasons why people are churning. When eventually most companies get to this realization is that you're way better off focusing on who's successful and how do you get more people to the successful state, and how do you focus on your onboarding and activation, because that sort of really compounds down the funnel afterwards. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest areas where you see the biggest impact, is when you make that switch from being reactive to why people churning to being proactive in terms of how do we get more people to that successful state? How do we onboard and activate more users to ensure that they're extracting value from our products?
Yeah, onboarding was, of course, one of the things I wanted to dive into with you in this episode. So maybe let's get to it immediately. What kind of role does onboarding play when you look at retention, and what are some best practices you saw over the past 10, 15 years from companies?
So, I think it's crucial, onboarding. I think so often than not as well, especially in the early days, we're really heavily focused on building features for our products. And at some point, we just become this feature factory that's difficult to understand or navigate. And we lose sight of what that first time user experience is. And so definitely one exercise I always like to ensure working with companies and startups is that going back and revisiting that first time user experience regularly, just to get a pulse check of what you've built so far, does this still make sense? Is this easy to understand? Because a lot of times we might end up like think we're building these great features and value, but we start to see retention declining. And it's not that we're not building good products or features because we're listening to feedback. It's more that we're not paying attention to what is that experience, that onboarding experience, and how do I enable my customers to establish that value prop and understand it. So I'd say that's one area. Another area I think that I found fascinating and something still I want to apply, and like a startup haven't got around to it yet, but actually was Jana Basto shared on the show from ProdPad a unique way that they approach their user onboarding. So essentially what they found was that they had this 30-day trial for people to come in and test out the product, and they said, well, most of the activity is only really happening in like the first week anyway for those to become customers. Why do we have this 30-day window? And they said, okay, like let's cut it in half. And essentially they cut it in half and conversions increased. And like, oh, this is interesting. Like we've created urgency now. People want to like, there's a reason now that they need to trial the service and actually use it in that period of time. Like what if we cut it in half again? They did it again. Conversions increased. So like, this is another thing. And then I think at that point, like 7 days was a little bit difficult to start cutting in half again. So what they went and did is, okay, like how do we level this up now? And they started to actually then use free days in their trial to encourage action. So like if you added your credit card, you got an extra 4 days. If you took a specific key action in the product, you got 3 days. And they really started then like gamifying the onboarding process, but rewarding the users by taking key actions that they wanted them to do in the product. And I think this was fascinating, like how they managed to really increase their onboarding experience by like tying some other additional value to it, which was getting to experience the product for longer as well.
To be honest, I don't see a lot of companies doing that, right?
Almost
gamifying
no one.
it.
Yeah, I think I've heard like 2 stories or 3 stories of it since the
Why
last
would
5
that
years.
be? Is it because it's if when you tell it, it seems like a no-brainer to do stuff like that, right? Because
Yes.
you hook them and you give them more value whenever they give you more, let's say data or they get closer to signing a deal or something.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's obviously quite a lot of complexities involved in setting something like this because you're dealing not only with just the onboarding now, but you're also dealing with the billing setup and then the trial setup, and it becomes a complex like process, I think, to like initiate. I think the barrier to entry doing something like this now is like drastically reducing now with AI and LLMs and being able to like build these experiences. So I do think we'll start to see more of these tailored experiences as well, not only like from a perspective of like driving you to take key actions and rewarding you, but also like how do you hyper personalize that experience then as well to make sure that actually the rewards are based on the reactions that are going to benefit that customer and the use case they have for your product.
In a lot of your episodes, I hear you and people speaking about opinionated onboarding. I also had Gaurav Vora, who introduced us, by the way. Thanks, Gaurav. He also spoke about it, how they did it at Superhuman. But can you explain our listeners a bit more about that? Because it's whenever you look for it, you Google it. Yeah, there does not seems to be a lot of content about that so far.
Yeah, Gaurav's great, by the way, as well. Like the episode on Churn FM was fantastic. And yeah, so thanks as well, Gaurav, for the intro. But essentially, I think like the idea as well on opinionated onboarding is really like trying to be opinionated on the path that your users should be taking to experience value in your product or app. And there's this idea of like next best action. So like at any given time, like you really only should be focusing on one action to drive your users to be taken, and it should be sequential in order for them to get to the point where they establish their value prop. Reforge, I think, has some good material on sort of the onboarding stages themselves. And the first stage really is like the setup moment. Like what do your customers really need to do within your product to get it set up so that they can then start to establish the first aha moment, and then they can start to establish a habit out of that aha moment. So mapping out your user journey in this way, like from sign up to habit, you can then start to think, okay, what are the key actions that we need our users to be taking to get to that point of habit? And then how can we be opinionated about taking those steps? And so like a practical example, I'll just give you like for Hotjar's case is that the setup moment for Hotjar really was around like getting and installing the tracking script. There's quite a lot of complexity though already in this first step. If you think about it, it's if you're not an engineer, it requires you to be working with an engineer in the company. You need to add a piece of code to your site. In some larger companies, you have legal that get involved. You'll have other teams who have opinions about it. When you actually go to do it as well, then like you have to deal with the different platforms and making it work across Webflow and all these different products or services. So there's a lot of complexity in like trying to engineer an experience to get people to that setup moment effectively. And like we spend a lot of time experimenting and iterating just on that first stage of how to get to value. But then the next best thing is like we needed to understand, okay, what were the use cases they were coming to us for? What was the problems our users had? And then how could then we create this opinionated onboarding experience that navigated them towards that specific actions. And understanding user behavior was very big reason obviously for coming to Hotjar. And we had a couple of tools that we believed were the best or like the most exciting for users that would then get them to onboard to the next feature. And really then was around how do we create this aha moment then for you, like to experience your first session recording, for example, because that I think was like an eye opener for users back in the day. Was like, okay, wow, like I can actually see what people are doing on my website or app. Like this is amazing. And then was thinking, okay, like from setup, how do we get people to that first action? Like that's the only thing that matters really in the product, because we know like once people get to that, they experience that, they're going to want to come back for more, and then they're going to end up retaining and then end up becoming a good customer. So I think it's really just about like understanding your users like pain points, their use cases, then understanding where your product like meets and matches those. Looking as well a little bit of like data to try and understand, okay, which of these retains better? Where do we have the highest like velocity of people actually taking these actions? And then being able to engineer your onboarding experience to drive people to those key actions.
You mentioned aha moments. It's something in my episode with Gaurav, he had like a really strong opinion on those. I also wrote about it recently. I don't know if you saw the post, but he was ranting on aha moments. He called it the biggest, I think let's call it the biggest piece of bullshit in growth. What's your opinion on that? How do you look at it? Because we all know the famous examples from Facebook, etc. But you spoke to almost 300 people.
Yeah.
What are some common things there?
No. So I think the Facebook thing, I think this is an example I give at the start of my every show, like the 7 friends in 5 days, whatever. It's like, for me, I think like that's often referenced as like the way to like create retention. And for me, I think that's absolute bullshit as well. I think there's no silver bullet. Like the whole premise of why I started the show is literally that specific line, is that like people automatically thought, okay, like if I just get 5 friends in 7 days, people will retain.
All good.
But it's not about that at all. Like you really need to understand like for your individual product, for the use case. And like I think there's so many different inputs that go into retention itself that lead to the final output. But I think the aha moment itself is really about like how do you get people to establish that first piece of value from their product so that you can win their attention to keep coming back. And I think like Sean Klaus shared an interesting insight on the podcast as well, is that they did in the early days at Atlassian, he set up the growth team, and they did some analysis trying to understand, okay, like what was the biggest reason for retention? And what they ended up finding out was that the single biggest indicator if somebody would retain or not was the amount of time they spent in the product in their first session. So if they spend less than 30 minutes, they're almost never going to become a customer. And if they spend more than 30 minutes, they're always almost certainly going to become customers. And so what was interesting about that, what they found was that like, okay, in order to get people to stay longer, they needed to get to them to the point where they could establish value as quick as possible. Because if they were spending 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes like trying to figure things out and never got to experience like what is this reason I'm using your product or service for, like where is that initial point of value that sort of sparks me to want to continue on my journey, they'd almost certainly lost it. So I think there is like a lot of value in understanding that. And I think there's also another like really good framework, I think from Darius Contractor, called the Psych framework. And essentially what he encourages as well is to sort of map out your user journey and give yourself positive points when you have like positive moments, or negative points when you have like friction in the journey. So like, let's imagine the website, you land on the site and like, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is amazing. Psych level goes up. I get to sign in form. I have to fill in form. Oh, this is crap. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, psych goes down. And like, you're trying to understand like where you're on this journey. And like, I think the aha moment really is like a big point in time where you can like pack a punch with the value that your product can deliver to your user, get it to them in a meaningful way. And then that like sort of allows them to continue on their journey. So I'd probably take the counterpoints to Gaurav on the aha. I need to read the post obviously as well to discuss it a little bit in further detail. But yeah, For me, I think like it is important, but like it's important for different reasons, right?
Yeah, the aha moments indeed. It's a great post. He also was expanding it, but he told me there's a lot of information about that topic on Reforge as well. But further going a little bit deeper on that, I'm currently working for a company called Trend Tracker, which is enterprise software for, let's call it AI-powered strategic intelligence for enterprises. And what we see there is also, until a couple of months ago, companies basically needed an implementation partner to help them use the product. Now we got rid of the demo, at least it's not the main call to action anymore, and we want to push them to trials. And we implemented all kinds of features that make it easier for them to get to the trend boards. For example, we have the AI board agent that's coming out now. We have an AI analyst and a discover feature. And the last one, it really helps them based on a couple of prompts. It's like a Netflix AI engineered kind of interface that gives recommendation based on their context. And that's something that's really moving the needle. And I think aha moments, we can say a lot about it, but for us that was one. I think like getting them to the trends faster really increases the value. And what you say, it really makes them stay in the platform a lot longer. And that's where you move the needle. So I love the theory.
I think though as well there is like this notion in growth as well, like at least I think it's changing the narrative, but in the past it was really about like getting them to this moment as fast as possible. And I think the bad side of that is that people then try to over optimize for speed rather than value delivered, and not in all cases like can you get to that point of value extremely fast. And so I'll give you a good example that came up on the show as well by Eleanor Werner, talking about segments in the early days. In the beginning, they sort of like wanted people to be able to get data in and set things up fast, and they allowed people just basically to self-serve to start. And at some point they realized, okay, like their customers were getting started fast, but they were just creating the same problem they had to begin with, because the value prop of segment was come in, like have one script, send your events in one beautiful way to all the different tools, so everything is clean. But what ended up happening was that people just get started without a good tracking plan, and then essentially creates mess in the end. And so they actually added friction to the onboarding experience. They said, okay, like to get started, you need to work with us to set up a very good tracking plan. Once we're happy with the initial tracking plan and we work on the implementation together, then you can get going started. What they actually found is significantly increased retention, is significantly increased conversion, which it goes counterintuitive to what most people say, okay, like get them in as fast as possible.
But it makes it really harder to
fix
get
later.
them in, right? So like to acquire the users, it makes them really hard. And that's also what we experienced with Trend Tracker. The harder you make the onboarding, the fewer people that go through it, in my opinion.
The fewer people that go through it, but like the more serious people are also going through it. And the people that really have the problem. And then you start to see like retention on the other end. You start to reduce like the overhead on support and dealing with issues that like aren't meant to be your customers. I think there's pros and cons of both. And you need to understand like to what level of degree of friction are you introducing, to what level output are you getting on the other end. And so I think like for me, that was just interesting, like to think about how it's not about the speed at which, obviously like the speed matters because you're getting people there, but it's really about like what is the valuable thing that you're delivering, like, and is it really like solving a problem that you're coming to for immediately, or is it just like a shiny new toy that you're flashing in front of people? So I think that's also like the question you need to ask yourself constantly is like what it is that you're delivering is like, is this really an aha moment? Is this something that's going to like change user behavior or get them to see something in a new light or enable them to do something much better, much faster?
Yeah, we already touched it really briefly, but something I also wanted to discuss with you is, a new trend we're currently facing is the AI native companies that go to super high valuations quite fast. For example, we had Lovable that recently reached, I think plus 10 million in ARR in less than 2 months with 20 people. So they grow at light speed, but how do you look at these companies churn? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I think it's way too early to have an opinion on this. I think in one aspect, like you would say, okay, this is not sustainable. This extreme growth, it happens in every startup. And most of the times what ends up happening is like hyper growth masks the problem of churn and retention just because you're able to acquire more users every month than you're churning. So like on aggregate, like the 3% or 5% or 10% that you're churning looks low to begin with. But then at some point you start to hit the ceiling where growth starts to stall a little bit because you can't sustain these numbers, and then churn starts to catch up and you realize oh shit, it's a bigger problem than we actually thought it was. But I think like to say, is this good or bad yet, or where things are at, I think it really depends on the business, on the use case, on the market size. Like, I don't think there is like this one size fits all, like this is a good retention number. And I think I'm like not a fan of benchmarks at all for this reason, because I think as long as you can make like the unit economics in your business work, like you could have a churn rate of 12% and still have a good, healthy business, which sounds crazy. But I think it's understanding all the other metrics and inputs that go into it. So Brian Borford has a good thing on this around the 4 fits, is really around like, do you have product market fit, do you have market channel fit, and do you have channel model fit? So if you're able to acquire users for nothing, like you can then, and you're like acquiring them at velocity, like escape velocity speed, because you have a viral product, then like you can deal with a higher churn rate. So I think like it just really depends on your product, on your audience, on your use case, and you need to figure out that math to see like, does this model work? Can we actually build a business on this? Is there a market big enough to support it? So yeah.
You mentioned at one point, churn might catch up with user acquisition. That's like a problem you don't want to have, I think. How do you measure churn effectively, and what metrics should businesses focus on beyond just the churn rate? Because it's a concept, it's a lot about it is written already, but what's your take?
So I think with churn and retention, like that's the output, and it's really about like you needing to know and understand what are the inputs that are driving this output. And for me, like more than often than not, it comes down to like 3 or 4 different variables. The first one I would say is like having a good understanding of like what your ideal customer profile looks like, and essentially like who's getting the most value out of your product or service, and is there sort of any properties that you can associate with them that enables you to find more of them. So let's like give an example of Hotjar again. Like in the early days, we did a whole bunch of analysis on different variables, and we came back that like mid-market companies with an Alexa rank of below 1 million were like the ideal customer profile for us. So then that allowed us to go and try and find more of these and develop growth strategies to acquire them. But why that was also important was that they retained like 5-6 times better than everybody else in the business. So that's like for me, one of the first inputs is like, are you bringing the right people through the door, and at like what velocity and ratio are you doing this? Because you can do all the great things like in your onboarding experience and in products and so forth. But then if you're feeding the top of the funnel with the wrong type of customers, no product work you're going to do is going to help with like improving this metric. So you really need to do like the early work of understanding that. And then I like to optimize for like the ICP lead velocity growth rate. So trying to say like month to month, like are we growing the number of ideal customers coming through our funnel on the top end? And that's like a core metric that's traditionally like a marketing metric, but it has significant impact on downstream and on the funnel. The next one then would be like the activation metric. So like I'd want to look at the setup moment. So how many people are actually doing the actions that they need to take in order to get to that point? How many people establish a value aha moments and then they build a habit out of it? Are they doing your core action within the time frequency that makes sense for your product? And that's something else that I look at. Like to get to that point, I think it's always interesting just to put together a basic histogram where you map out the last 30 days, how many times people use your products, like 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and you can see then how many users, what that distribution looks like. So if it's skewing all the way to the end of the axis on the right, you know, like people are using your product every day. If they're skewing way to the left, it's like once a month. Like, so you can get a sense and understanding from there. So that's another area like I'm always trying to understand is like, what is the natural frequency of usage for our product? And like, are our customers meeting that natural frequency of usage? So Neriel has an interesting like thing on this in his book called Hooked, which was like the natural frequency of like brushing your teeth is like twice a day. Some people maybe 3 times. Like there's no ways like you're going to get people to brush their teeth more than that. So if you take that same analogy into your product, if you're trying to get like somebody to use your product every day, but they're not doing that action every day, let's take the example of like Zillow. I think Reforge talks about this, where you don't buy a house every day. So you're not going to get people coming to your site every day to look for it. So you're trying to engineer that behavior is never going to happen. So you need to understand that so that you can and work backwards. So, and then obviously at the end of it is like the churn and retention that comes out of it. But I'm normally always wanting to look at 1, like, are we bringing the right people through the door? 2, are we activating them and getting them to that value, establishing that value prop? And then I'd also maybe wanting to look at like a 3-month or a 6-month retention rate to understand, okay, are the impacts that we're doing like in this onboarding and engagement experience early on getting to, because I think once they get past like the 3-month period, I think most startups, I think they lose probably like 70 to 90% of churn happens within the first 90 days, something like that, from what I've seen. So it really is that like critical period that you want to be focusing on.
Yeah, I like the example of Nereal. I read a book indeed, but another one that's really nice there is the Waze founder. I think his name is called Uri Levine or something, and he wrote a book called Fall in Love with the Problem, Not with the Solution. And he also mentions like he only wants to invest in companies that have like a frequency of two usages at least per day. Like Waze, people use it to commute to work. It's like they use it in the morning and they use it in the afternoon or the evening. Yeah, it's a really interesting take on how to approach it. So I really liked it.
Yeah, I think it's a good framework as well to think about like when building a startup, is because you really want people to create and build habits around your product if they're going to go and use it.
That's what everyone wants, right? Yeah.
Yes. And if you're building a product that doesn't have this naturally baked into it, where like people do this action regularly, like it's incredibly difficult to change user behavior. Like I'm not going to say impossible, but it's very, very difficult. To the example of like the brushing your teeth. But so knowing that upfront and understanding, okay, like this is it. Like it's not to say that you can't do it. So the Zillow case is an example as well that Reforge give in their course material, which is like they realize, okay, this is not working, the natural frequency of usage. Like, but we want to make sure we're staying top of mind. Like, how can we stay top of mind so the next time they come, maybe 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, that they think of Zillow to buy a house. So they say, well, like one thing that's interesting for property owners is that everybody wants to know the value of their house. This is changing all the time. We can get them to subscribe to these valuation changes. And then they had this newsletter that would go out and say, hey, like your property now has increased 5% in value. Looking at the market things, is it time to sell? So like they created like this experience that like was interesting for the user to stay top of mind. And then they would come in and check every now and again and say, oh, like my neighbor's selling their place, or like this looks like an opportunity for us in the market. So there are ways to think about like creating this like to stay top of mind, but to build habits when it's outside of like a frequency, and like 2 times in a day, I think is quite extreme as a bar, but I think it's a very powerful bar to have, because then it's like, you know, that this is something that's absolutely vital to people to be using regularly.
Yeah. I also like your real estate examples because I've been consulting for Belgian real estate, like more a broker, but it's that market is like a real pain in the ass. It's so hard to identify people who are really looking to buy or sell their house, and next to that, it's also a super competitive market. So it comes with so many challenges. Yeah, I haven't cracked that code yet.
Yeah, good luck.
Maybe all the things we just discussed, like, can you share one specific case study of a company that, significantly reduced their churn, and maybe how they did it? Like one of the 283 episodes, which one, stuck to you most?
I won't like give maybe one of the 283. I can tell you about Hotjar, and I think what was some of the most significant changes that we did there. Hotjar, like predominantly, even though like the ICP was mid-market, we serve predominantly SMBs. Naturally, like churn is high in that segment, and we were sitting around like 7 to 8% churn retention, and we ended up getting it almost to net negative in the end, like before I left. So there was a couple of things I think that were really like game changers for us during that journey. Was first, it started out as like this problem where internally somebody went and put together like a growth calculator to understand where the ceiling was. And then we realized like, oh, like the ceiling's actually much closer than we thought it was. Churn is catching up faster. We need to fix this. So like alarm bells were rang, like churn is a problem. Let's fix this. But nobody knew how to fix it. So everybody was saying this is a problem, this is an issue, but there was really like no process or methodology or like things. What I ended up like doing myself as well, I was fortunate that I'd gone through Reforge a couple of times, and then some of these courses, they'd done really good retention courses. I was like, okay, like, we really need to first like upskill the team now. We need to educate and like let them understand the problem at a deeper level and how it influences their roles as well. So I think the first step really is like around alignment. Is like, okay, this is the problem. Let's do a diagnosis of the problem. Like, where is this issue happening from me? So what we also realized in our case was that it was that first 90 days that was critical window, and even more so that first week. So that then became like this easy to focus area for the company to understand, okay, like the first week is really the critical moment in this, and we need to navigate and like focus our resources accordingly. And not only just saying that churn's a problem, but also saying, okay, like, how do we fix it, and how is your role impacting it? And so to the point earlier, like marketing, like you need to acquire the ICP because they retain better. Like your effort should now focus like going towards that. Supports, like we get tons of tickets all the time. These are like the benefit customers. Like let's have a priority queue where we start to focus on these over others so we retain longer. Like we had in this throughout the organization, then like sales, like this is how we now start to change compensation. So it's not just selling deals, but it's also on retaining deals. So we split up commissions and you're selling into the right companies then because you're more motivated. And it's all these little steps of like how each team can influence thing. And it's not just like solely relying on product or solely relying on customer success. It really is like if you're building a subscription business and people are canceling their subscriptions, like you have a serious problem. Like that is your business and it's everybody's problem and it's everybody's challenge to try and figure out. But they can't do that if they don't understand like how their inputs and how their work is actually influencing the final output. So I'd say for me, that's probably like the biggest and best place to start is really like doing a good diagnosis and then like educating your team on how everybody can play a role in reducing it. And it's not just the responsibility of an individual team, and making it a company priority where like everybody focuses on this specific metric. Over time, through this iteration work and understanding, then like it really helped significantly decrease. There was obviously a lot of other like little things that we did, but I feel like that was probably one of the biggest shifts in the culture and the focus around the problem.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, when it comes to churn, one of the probably the most common reasons is often pricing as well. If you look at it, whenever you want to cancel one of the tools, always when they ask you why are you leaving us, the first reason that comes up is mostly it's too expensive. But how does pricing strategy impact churn in your opinion? And especially what adjustments can companies make there? Because we see like I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly, but Kyle Poyer, who was also on your podcast. I saw him create more content about pricing, AI-based price models, usage-based, etc. Super curious to hear your point of view.
Yeah, so I don't think pricing is one of the biggest reasons for churn unless your pricing model is broken. So I think it's healthy to have a decent level of churn coming from pricing, because if you don't have like 10 to 15% complaining about prices, your pricing is too cheap. So I think already like that's sort of one thing just to put aside, is that like you're always going to have this as an issue, and that just means as well like these weren't good fit customers to begin with, and you need that sort of level, otherwise you're like underpricing your product and you're not extracting enough value on the one end. So I think that's just understanding like where you sit, what percentage is coming from there. But let's say in your case, like as you mentioned, like it's 40% or 50% coming from pricing. I think then this is something that really needs to be considered and taken into consideration. Pricing and packaging like work in itself, I think more often than not is like it's guesswork in the beginning. So like everybody just sort of like sucks their thumb and says, okay, what should we price? And it's like, oh, $49.99, or it's like, let's look at the 2-3 competitors and let's like be about the same. And this is how people do pricing and packaging for the most part, which the problem with that is like that's how everybody does it. So if you're copying others, nobody's really done the work to understand how you should price and package your product effectively. There's definitely like good methodologies and methods for doing so. And there's a couple of companies as well, like Hotjar pricing, price intelligently, but it all really comes down like at the basic level, just a panel study of potential buyers, trying to understand, okay, what the willingness to pay and likelihood to buy is. So you can get an understand of the market and where everybody's sitting, because a lot of times, well, we might go to our existing customer base trying to understand what pricing should be, but there's a very big inherent bias with them because they've used the product, and what you're trying to understand is the market's perception of value. So I think it has an influence, but it's just like any other inputs as well to churn and retention. It's like you need to understand, is that the problem, and like to what degree is that the problem itself, because there's a healthy level where it's okay. 10 to 15%, in my opinion, is a good level of people complaining about pricing.
Cool. Yeah, I think you said one thing. If 10 to 15% of your churn is not coming from pricing, you're probably selling it too cheap. That's one of those quotes. If Eric Ries would have said that, it would have gone absolutely viral, and we would be speaking about it for many years. But it's a good one. I'm gonna print it on a t-shirt.
Nice, nice. And to credit as well, it's not even me like who came up with this. I've heard about it from somewhere else. I think probably even maybe Patrick Campbell or somebody else I mentioned it. Might not have been like in a blog post, but like in a casual conversation, because we worked with them as well at Hotjar. I led the pricing and packaging work there, which actually we ended up increasing the average selling price by around 30%, and churn and retention stayed the same, conversion rate stayed the same. So in our case, like we were already like underpricing our product or service at that point, and to the point where like we didn't realize that like we thought we were hearing the pricing complaints a lot. And like I think like quantifying it's important, because we often overgive weight to these things, especially like early stage founders. We have this bias, which is like we never feel our product is good enough, and then that gets amplified when people complain that it's too expensive, and like we don't realize the value we're actually delivering. So we have these blinders on. But taking a step back, like just quantifying, understanding, like, okay, this is an acceptable level, like people should be complaining about this, and that's probably not the right fit for us anyway.
A topic very closely related to that one is it's becoming a really popular topic. It's what they call SaaS and subscription fatigue. It's probably not something you probably like, I can imagine. But yeah, how do you see software pricing evolving, and what's your general take on SaaS fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, I go backwards and forwards in the same one, because at the same time, like I build products on the side just for fun, and realizing like how easy it's become. So in the past, where I would like need to have like 4 or 5 engineers working like 6 to 8 months to build a product, like I'm spinning that up in like a week now myself. So I think this definitely changes. I think though the bar for like what good software is raising all the time now. And to get to a really high bar like takes time and takes effort. And so I don't see like things disappearing where like everybody's just going to be building their own software and just meeting their own needs, because like even if it is just like 1 or 2 small bugs every now and again, like those 1 or 2 small bugs for big organizations just are a pain to deal with, and they detract you from your focus of your core product or service offering. I don't see that going away. I definitely see like changing of pricing models. I see like some interesting takes as well recently. An example came to mind now, which was post-hog analytics. I think they've really like changed the game on pricing and packaging for product analytics.
We're quite power users.
Yeah. And I'd probably see more of this. And I think because like speaking to James, like their CEO, was like the idea there was like he saw analytics becoming a commodity. He's like, this is just going to be like your AWS services, like your cloud infrastructure. Our pricing is going to be cost plus margin, where everybody else in the industry was doing value-based pricing, which was like, okay, like how much value are people extracting? What is the willingness to pay? Like, and he said like, no, like that's one. And number 2 was like, my ideal customer is going to be engineers, because we're going to be the first ones in, and they're the most price sensitive to begin with. And I think that's sort of like the combination of those 2 things really like helped the business explode. Obviously the open source and all that around it. But so I think there's a lot of innovation happening now on pricing and packaging that's going to be very, very disruptive for companies. But I still think there's a lot of opportunities with the right pricing and packaging and subscription models to be able to build incredibly profitable and successful businesses.
Yeah, you see a lot of usage-based pricing these days.
Yes.
Yeah, also super curious where this is gonna go. A lot of companies are experimenting with it. I saw the Kyle's post with Growth Unhinged, where he listed all the companies, and I think 90% of them already did usage-based pricing. Of course, these are mostly AI native companies, but yeah.
I think with the usage-based is the problems with it is there's a lot more complexities that go into understanding what your bill is going to be. So from a user experience, they're not ideal. And I think those could essentially cause as well concerns on the conversion front. So like if you're getting offered a service which is pay per use, or an office which is like a specific price point that you know is guaranteed to be paid every month, and you have access to that product or service, like especially on larger companies and customers, I think like you'd end up probably losing more deals to the person who's giving the fixed guaranteed rate versus the variable cost rate, which especially like if you're needing to like discuss budgets and talk internally and like get approval for things, and it's like, yes, okay, well, how much are we going to pay? Like, well, I don't know, like depends on how much we use it. Like, so I think the models I think that'll be successful though will be like a combination of the two, which and some like product analytics companies and things have done this in the past where it's usage based, but you sit within specific brackets, and then if you have overages, like you can either choose to be charged for them or you can get cut off at a certain point, and they're heavily discounted then afterwards as well. So it'll be interesting. I think definitely like a lot of experimentation happening around pricing and packaging. I think all models could be viable or will still be viable, just depending on your product or service and your customer and preferences.
I think you don't have so much time left, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm gonna move. I'm gonna skip a lot of my questions. But a lot of all of what we discussed today already comes down to a lot of experimentation, if you ask me. And as we mentioned a couple of times already, you spoke with growth leaders from the craziest companies in the world. What were some memorable experiments or war stories related to growth that they told you about? If you just have to pick one.
So many. There's so many that I can't remember one now. This is
That happens.
This is the problem.
I'll if you don't find one immediately, I'll let you think about it for a couple of minutes. But I'll go to my next topic because we haven't touched on it for a lot of time. But yeah, I quickly wanted to go into AI. Yeah, a lot of these companies, AI native companies, they are also moving towards churn, pricing, retention. It's like a big gap, I think, in software. How can AI and automation help companies reduce churn? Do you have a take on that as well?
I mean, I think obviously like AI is just like another tool that we have at our abilities to be able to like have an impact. I think the areas that are probably like the most exciting at this point is that AI really gives us the ability at scale to do personalization. And I think there's multiple different areas in which we can look into personalization. Like one is the onboarding experience, like how can we make it hyper personal to our users to increase activation. Two is even before that is like the hyper personalization of, first of all, identifying who's a good fit customer, and then second, converting that good fit customer because they're going to then end up retaining. And then on the other end as well is like looking for different signals and understanding not just what we have as data internally today about our customers, but also monitoring for signals externally around who they are. And this depends as well on like the business, the segment. So this example I'm giving now would be like if you're dealing with larger companies, like higher average selling price. These are sort of companies you do want to be understanding like changes or shifts in hiring or different dynamics in the business, so you can understand, are there potential churn risks that in the past would have been very expensive, very time consuming to do, but with a few different AI agents, like you could be monitoring your customers and understanding like their moves and shifts in the market, not only from a churn perspective but also from an expansion perspective, and like if there's an opportunity. So in the past you wouldn't really understand like if companies have grown significantly to be able to reach out to them and say, hey, like, do you need more licenses or do you need additional things? So I think AI just enables us to take what we've tried to automate in the past, scale that almost infinitely with personalization, so that like we can deliver much more tailored experiences to our users.
Cool. Yeah, at Trend Tracker, the company I mentioned earlier, one of the things we did related to AI is like the VP product. He built like let's call it a custom GPT. It's not a real agent yet, but he linked it to the customer insights database and all kinds of conversations we have with prospects, sales related questions, but also with existing customers. All this input goes into the custom GPT, and of course we use it for marketing input, but I think in a really near future, we could also use it to predict churn, for example, if we can link it a little bit closer to the platform and the actual amount of time people spend, etc. We could really see like that kind of user is closer to churning or anything. So it can really help us there as well, I think. So churn prediction, that's something I strongly believe in, that in only a couple of months, we'll have like, really great companies that will help us to do that.
I think though as well, like there's the next level to that, which is not just like churn prediction, but it's also like churn prevention before it's even happening. And I think there's definitely like interesting things. So like something I really liked doing as well recently was like just taking support tickets and plugging into Notebook LM and producing a podcast and sharing that with the team, because there's a much big impact. But to your point around like understanding like support tickets coming in, potential churn issues, is that I think we're at a point now where, if you're familiar with the concepts of like an MCP, which can basically, you provide a framework for an LLM to use a specific tool or service. There is one for Slack, and this is like an interesting use case. Like I want to try to get to at some point to be able to set up where you can imagine a world where companies have like feedback coming in from customers or support tickets coming in from customers. A bug gets flagged, the MCP picks that up, sends it to Cursor with a description of what needs to get fixed. Cursor goes ahead and creates a fix for the bug, submits a pull request, and then an engineer maybe then just taking a look at what's been done and hit submit. And like we can see a world now where like, and then the loop can be closed as well, where we update the customer. So I'm working, I see a bug, I report it, automatically this loop goes in, it gets fixed in real time, it gets shipped, and it's like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like, and I think we're getting to this point where like these changes and fixes can be happening almost in real time. And when we get to that point, then I think like it really becomes around like focusing on what is the problem my customer has, like what is the most value my product can deliver, and like how can I prioritize like what we're building and why. Because like in the world where we start to reduce, then all the other like barriers to entry and reasons for churn, like I think those things can almost all be automated away to some degree at some point.
What kind of tools are you using there? I think my audience is kind of keen on tools and tactics, but do you have examples?
Yeah, I mean, this specific example is something like I want to start to look into a little bit and get set up. So, I mean, when I'm building my own products, I'm using Cursor AI, which is like a browser, it's an IDE, and enables you just to write software, but they integrate with all the LLMs. And the nice thing with it, though, is you can create like really good rules for your software to always follow. And then when it's producing the work for you, you know it's in a specific style, and it's easy to then maintain and to build like larger projects. But then there's some interesting other tools now that like plug into that with the MCPs, which is like in the past, like if you're developing something, browser, like it'll be copying stuff from your browser console into the LLM. Now there's like a way to communicate with the browser automatically. So the LLM's like, there's a problem. Oh, I need to check the console. It goes and checks the console, comes back. And there's all these little experiences now that I think are going to be really interesting to see like how far we can stretch things to the point where like everything almost becomes fully automated. Another example experimented with a friend as well is that like most of the times when engineers produce like pull requests, those are things that get shipped to production, and then marketing goes and takes those and needs to create an update and report to the team. This is something that can automatically be updated. We built a product for it. We just never launched it. I can share the link as well.
Yeah,
it's like releases.now. And essentially what it does is you connect your GitHub. When there's a pull request, it gets approved. It automatically generates a release note for you. It goes to your public change log and notifies your customers in product that this new feature has been released. And like, there's a lot of these like little different interactions now that I think through automation, like streamline what the team can do as well. Like your velocity increases, and then that naturally allows you just to spend more time delivering value to customers. And so I'm also keen about thinking about what are all these different like points of like friction within the team, within like that we're wasting time on mundane tasks that AI can really just automate away.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most advanced things that someone already told in this podcast, coming all the way from Cyprus. But it's super nice, and I think with the existing tools, you don't have to be that technical anymore. That's the nice thing, because I think for marketing and growth related people that weren't technical in the past, their AI is like a blessing to do this kind of stuff for them. Maybe one more AI related question: how can businesses train AI models effectively when they have limited churn data? For example, with Trend Tracker, the company has been around for 5 years, and I think 2 or 3 customers churned over all these years. So we don't have actual data or a lot of data on why companies leave Trend Tracker. Any insights on that?
I wouldn't waste my time on trying to figure that out if it's only 2 or 3 people churning.
Yeah, but now we're scaling, of course. We've been
still like, I mean, if it's been 2 or 3 years and there's only been 2 or 3 people, I would say that's not like an issue. And I think I'm honestly not a fan of like trying to train models to predict churn or retention. And I think because most of like the tangible stuff is intangible, and like the reasons like are outside of things that you see in the data. So I think you're better off, especially like at the early stage, really focusing on qualitative side of things and seeing like what signals you can get from user interviews, from feedback channels, from places like G2 or Capterra or Reddit, where people are leaving signals about your product or service online and aggregating those and then like producing insights from that, rather than trying to produce a model like through data analytics that's going to be a predictor of why people churn. Because like I think a lot of things happen outside of the control within the day-to-day of your product and data that will end up giving you a lot of false signals as well on the one end.
Okay, cool. Yeah, for the first time ever in a Growth Secrets episode, I had like a guest question. So if you allow me, I will still ask that
please.
one. Churn is very often related to technology and software companies, but and another industry that's very much impacted with churn is the fitness industry.
Mm-hmm.
So the marketing manager of one of the biggest Belgian fitness chains asked me like, what tips could you give a fitness chain to handle churn and to prevent it, as you say?
Yeah. So this is like a topic I love as well. Something I've been wanting to do on the show now for a while is trying to bring in people from different backgrounds and industries and see how they deal with retention. Because as you say, it's like typically a software-based business, but every business cares about retention. And even if it's not like a subscription, you want people coming back to do repeat purchases. So I think there's like a story as well I heard, I think it was probably on a Gary Vaynerchuk episode I was watching.
He has really an opinion on everything, right?
He has an opinion on everything, yes. But like his guest was very interesting and he was talking about, and I think that's probably why it just came up because it was related to churn and retention, is that like, and it goes back to the onboarding and activation, is really like understanding what the first time user experience is, and not only the first time, but then the time they come back again, you need to create these magical experiences. And it was an example given was a restaurant, and they had this very like methodical approach to how they dealt with people when they entered the restaurant. So they would be greeted and they'd be asked one question. It's like, is it your first time here? And if it was a first time here, the waiter, when they would seat them, they would put like a red napkin on that table. So then all the waiting staff and everybody knew there was the first time there. So they would come up to them and greet them. Oh, so it's your first time here. Let me tell you a little bit about the specials. Let me tell you a little bit about X, Y, or Z. And they created this tailored experience for that first time the guests had come in. The next time, like they come back, like, is it your first time? No, we've been here before. Like, oh, great. They had an experience tailored for that second time experience. And then like by the third time, they like, after they'd gone in the first time, where they came back the second time, because they created these two like really tailored experiences for them. Like this one's on the house, it's your second time here, enjoy it, whatever, you know. So like they had all these like steps engineered to create this experience, to create these magical moments for users. Like, oh wow, for users, I'm even calling users, for like restaurant owners. Ultimately, like again, it focused on like what is that initial experience, and after like the third time, they were almost always going to keep coming back, because by then they were on like a first name basis with like the people on the team, and this really created like this powerful mechanism. And I think the same thing can also be applied to places like gyms and other businesses, where it's like trying to understand like what does that experience need to look like for your first time user, for your second time visit, to keep coming back. And most often than not, it's just like pay us and then walk in and go use the gym. They might show you around a little bit, but it's not really tailored to you. There's nothing special. You don't get a feeling of like, oh wow, like this gym cares about me, or they're here for me. And I think like you could probably apply that same approach by saying, okay, like, first time users, like they get given maybe
a red kettlebell or something,
a red kettlebell, or like a specific towel, like a color towel. And then, you know, like the staff and everybody there is like showing them around, helping them out, treating them differently. And then like continuing that obviously through their journey as they become on board. And there's probably like a lot of other different like stories or analogies, but I think that's one of the ones that comes to mind immediately. There was like, oh wow, it's like, it's an interesting take, because it's something you think about more from a product and software perspective, but
exactly
applied in the real world and can have a significant impact.
Yeah, you make it sound like software is not the real world. We're so biased in that software world, but it's I get the
in
point.
The physical world,
in the physical, I get it. Okay, I always end the episode with a couple of small questions, like question answer, really short. I call it the quickfire, and then I'll leave you to it. But what's your big bet for 2025?
A big bet for 2025. For me, I think like when it comes to startups, there's probably only like three things that matter now at this point. And one is like distribution, brand, and the user experience. I think for me, like these are the three areas where you can really still stand out and differentiate yourselves. And I'm talking about software products specifically, because I think like engineering now is becoming a commodity. Anyone can almost build whatever they want at any point in time. It's one thing building something, but it's another thing creating an amazing user experience around it. So being able to build those core competencies for me is like an area of focus, like understanding like, do you have distribution, or how do we build like a moat around distribution, and then brand, like really creating personal experiences now, I think, and getting close to like your audience, I think is something that can really stand out, and being able to build authentic brands. In my role as well, like these are the things that I'm thinking about, is like, how do we stand out? And then obviously like, how do we just like 10x, 20x what we're doing today with the power of AI? How do we automate away all the mundane tasks we shouldn't be doing? And how do we accelerate like the ability for almost anybody in the company to be able to be contributing and delivering, whether it's in product or for marketing, at a much higher velocity.
Next one is, what's your favorite marketing book or resource, let's call it?
Favorite marketing book. I have quite a few different favorite books. Let's think the one that stands out the most, because they'll definitely be on the shelf here. It's hard to pinpoint one specific one. Yeah, I don't want to give one.
I don't see your shelf, so that doesn't help. I can't help you.
Yeah, I'm turning around. I'll tell you what's on the shelf, so maybe that'll help as well. So I've Hooked on the shelf. I really like it. It's a product framework, but I think can be applied to marketing as well. Hacking Growth by Morgan Brown, I think was good back in the day. The Lean Startup, even though I think it's like needs a revision now in this new world, I think it's always a good one. Start with Why, like Simon Sinek, I think is powerful. And The Cold Start Problem, Andrew Chen, it's a good one.
I haven't read that one. All the previous ones I read, but the one from Andrew Chen I didn't. So
yeah. And I also really enjoyed like Delivering Happiness. I think it's not a like marketing specific book.
Tony Tsai.
Yes.
It's amazing.
It's very good.
It's a must read for everyone. Exactly.
Yeah. I like things about hard things.
Yeah, I really like the story from Delivering Happiness, where where the journalist or the blogster, she ordered shoes and they weren't available, and how they went through all kinds of obstacles to deliver her the shoes. It's an amazing story.
And it's a marketing thing, and I think that also goes back to like the retention thing.
Exactly.
It's like physical world, like how do we get people to keep coming back? We create these magical experiences, and I think Amazon as well nailed this. I think around like the returns policy, they realized like it was way easier in most cases just to like tell people to keep the goods and like win them and make them happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Than to lose them as a long-term customer, because they know their like customer lifetime value of their customers thousands, and the product's maybe like $50 or whatever. So this gets built into the unit economics and into the workflow, where most companies be like, I want my goods back, I want the money back, like all of this, and like create a negative experience and potentially losing the customer from coming back.
That's what scale does, I guess. Okay, what's your favorite marketing tool?
Favorite marketing tool today, it's like ChatGPT, Grok.
Nobody told me about this. Everyone's got like LinkedIn, or Gaurav mentioned the written word, which is also a nice answer.
Yeah.
But no one actually says like the AI tools.
And today, it's like probably the only tools I'm using.
I can imagine.
And if I don't use them, I'm using them to build something that I need to do the job.
I have 2 more to go, and then you're free. If you could give one piece of advice to growth and marketing teams about churn, what would it be?
Focus on activation.
Okay. And then the last one, what's your best kept marketing secret?
Interesting. I don't have many secrets, to be honest.
If you do almost 300 episodes, I can imagine.
Episodes, and I share pretty much all my ideas all the time on the podcast, so I give my opinions in different places. So nothing like really stands out from like a marketing perspective, but I think like I am a big believer in like understanding who your ideal customer is, and then being able to use that to leverage and understand like what channels you should be going to reach them. And so like my typical go-to, like when working with companies, really trying to understand that first, because I think then everything like the whole like acquisition strategy gets fueled by that.
Cool. We're done. Thanks so much for taking the time, for your really great insights on churn and retention. Where can people find more about you? Probably the podcast, but are you super active on LinkedIn as well? I assume you do.
Yes, so I'm active on LinkedIn, on Twitter. You can reach me there. Both it's Andrew Michael SA.
I'll put the links in the show notes.
But like always available. My email is also andrew@churn.fm. So available there if anybody wants to chat further about these topics. Or anyone has any interesting stories as well. Like we're always looking for good guests to join us.
Cool. Okay. Thanks so much, Andrew. And thanks everyone for listening or watching, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Yannick. It was great chatting.